Today I'm planting and dividing some irises. I've got some new irises that I picked up at Walmart that are really pretty. I'm going to plant those today, and then I'm also digging up some irises from another area on our property, and I'm going to divide those up and plant them in a new spot. I did a video a few years ago dividing and planting irises, but I'm going to go ahead and take you guys along for the ride today and just kind of recap on that video. These are the irises that I picked up from Walmart. I thought they were really pretty, and I think I already have this variety, but a more blue color. Anyway, but I thought these were really pretty, and I've got this new area that I want to plant some irises in, so I picked these up. And then Garrett went ahead and dug up a bunch of irises from my garden in an area that I don't really want them anymore. They're kind of far off in a field, and you just don't ever see them. So we just took a few of those. There's still hundreds left there, and I'm going to divide those up and show you how I divide them. But before I do that, I want to show you how to pick out good rhizomes from like the hardware store or your garden center. The first thing you want to look for is a rhizome that's large in size and has a lot of roots still on it. You're going to cut these roots off anyway. They're not good. They're going to grow new roots. But you also, the number one thing you want to look for is the weight of the iris. You want it to feel heavy. If it feels paper thin, that means that rhizome is really dried out and there's not very much energy left. It doesn't mean it's not going to sprout, but it means that you probably won't get blooms in the second or even the third year. It's going to take a few years for that rhizome to get enough energy to start blooming. But you can see here there's some leaves coming up, leaf nodes. You want to look for that. You also want to look for these little nodes that I just pointed to. Those are where roots are going to be coming out of. So this is a really nice one. It's really healthy. It's got two leaf sections coming off of it, and it feels really heavy. Those are all the things that you want to look for when you're looking for a good rhizome. Otherwise, you may end up with a dead rhizome if you pick one that's paper light. But to be honest, you guys, these rhizomes, they store a lot of energy. So even if it feels super paper thin and you think it's dead, plant it anyway, because I promise it'll probably come up. Here I'm just pointing out where the increased rhizomes are. These are the new rhizomes that are forming from the mother rhizome. So not really important. We're not going to be dividing this one. We just want it to grow the way it is. This one, again, is nice and heavy. It's a good size. It's got a lot of roots coming off of it. And so with these probably won't bloom the first year, but they may bloom the second year. That's kind of why you want to look for a bigger rhizome, because the bigger the rhizome is, the more energy it's stored, and the more likely it is to bloom sooner than later. I'm not expecting these to bloom this year. It's already too late because they bloom in early spring. But I think that these will bloom next year, and I'll keep you updated on that. If not, for sure, the year after. So don't buy these thinking that once you plant them, you're going to get blooms that same year or even the next year. Just be patient. And I always say, just set them and forget them. So plant them where you want them to be and forget about them. Irises don't need a lot of attention. They barely need to be watered, really. I have really well draining soil. So I just plant them, and most of the time I don't even water them in. And in fact, I bought one of these a couple years ago, and I had dropped it in my garden and completely forgot about it, and I kept seeing it and I kept meaning to pick it up, and it eventually rooted into the ground, so I didn't even have to plant them. It came up on its own. It's still there. I need to dig it up and move it because it's in the middle of like a walkway. But that's life for you, I guess. But yeah, so you could just set these on the ground and they will root into the ground. They're very, very, very hardy. So I'm just cutting some of the roots off to make it easier to plant. But you can see this one's got leaves coming up already on one of those nodes. So we're going to plant these along a fence line in my garden. And again, I got these ones at Walmart. I think they have the same varieties at like Atwoods or Lowe's. So you can find them just about anywhere. And there's tons of places online that sell beautiful irises. Now these are the irises that Garrett dug up for me, and I'm going to go ahead and divide them. I'm going to show you how I divide them. I don't use pruners or scissors or anything like that. I just break them off. I have really well draining soil, so I'm not worried about these rotting at the point where I broke them off from the main rhizome. If you're in an area where your soil is stays a little bit more moist or is a little more muggy, you may want to let these dry before you plant them again. And if you're going to do that, you'll want to trim the leaves a little bit. Otherwise, they'll just wilt, and sometimes when you store a bunch of these in a basket with the leaves still on, you'll get some rot. So this is the mother rhizome. That's what I like to call it. It's the previous year's rhizome. All those little holes on the bottom are where the roots were. This one has a little bit of an eye coming up. So you can plant this and it may have enough energy to shoot off another plant. That tends to happen sometimes. So if you have an area where you just wouldn't mind some irises growing wild, you could just toss them in that area and see what happens. I've done that lots of times and I always get irises there. These were just dug up today, but I'm still going to trim the roots because it just makes it easier to plant. You don't have to trim the roots. You could put them right back into the ground and plant them right away if you know where you're going to transplant them. So some of these rhizomes are really small. I know they're not going to bloom this year, probably not even next. So I'm just going to trim off the leaves and let the plant use its energy to root into the ground faster so I can get a better established plant by the end of this season. Here I'm just dividing up the rhizomes again. These are all the pieces I don't need. I only need that main piece that's in my left hand there. And I'm just going to be trimming up the roots. So we're going to speed things up here and get these all cleaned up so I can replant them. Here you can see some old rhizomes from the previous year that are still attached. You could just go ahead and break those off. They're squishy, wrinkly. There's no energy left in there, so you could toss those away. If you see last year's growth is still firm and hard, like I said earlier, it could still throw off some new eyes and some new plants if you want to just toss them somewhere where you wouldn't mind them growing. But if they're squishy and wrinkly, they're no good. Now this step is not necessary, but you could do this if you just want to hydrate your rhizomes before you plant them to kind of give them a head start, especially if you're somewhere where it's really dry. We're going to get a lot of rain tomorrow, so I really do not need to do this, but I'm doing it anyway just for the sake of this video. I'm also putting my rhizomes that we dug up today in some water just to hydrate the leaves really quick before I plant them because they're starting to wilt because it is hot today. So that's kind of a good idea just to get a boost of water into the plant before you plant them if they're starting to wilt, if you're transplanting plants same day. Before you plant your rhizomes, you want to make sure there aren't any weeds in the area. So a little bit of prepping in the soil goes a long way. Garrett's just using the hula hoe here to get rid of any weeds that are sprouting. And this is Garrett's favorite part of gardening. He loves prepping soil and raking and weeding with fancy little tools. So he always asks me to save this part for him. Here we're just using a little Japanese hoe to get rid of some of the pokeberry that's coming up. And I didn't get it on video, but Garrett did end up digging up the pokeberry that was in this spot. And it was probably a good 5 pounds of roots. A great thing about irises is when you densely plant them, they will choke out other plants and they'll choke out grass and weeds. So I'm planting along the fence in this area just because I think it'll look pretty and because the birds tend to hang out on the fence right here, and so we get a lot of pokeberry that comes up in this area. I've had these sitting in here for about an hour and you can already tell the leaves are nice and firm again and they're not wilted at all, so I'm going to go ahead and plant these. Now when you go to plant your rhizomes, you want to make sure that you're planting them sort of at an incline. Where the leaves are coming out in the back of your rhizome, that's where you want that to be the highest point of the plant. And there's a little bit of a belly on the rhizome that I'm going to show you in a minute. That needs to be exposed. So you don't want to cover that up with sand because you want that to bake in the sun because that's how the rhizome is going to get energy and spread. So here you can kind of see how I'm trying to get an incline on the back of the rhizome. I didn't do a very good job on this one, but I didn't mention earlier, sometimes you may not want to break off the old rhizome when you're transplanting, because you can kind of use that to anchor the plant, and it helps keep the plant in place while it's establishing roots, and it really doesn't hurt to leave it on either. So here you can see that I'm burying part of the old rhizome, but you can see the belly of the rhizome that I'm pointing to right here. That needs to be exposed, and it's very obvious where it is. It's kind of like a little hump. You want to make sure that's exposed to the sun, and you're going to plant your irises in full sun. You can plant them in the shade, but you won't get blooms every year. You'll probably get blooms every 2 to 3 years, sometimes longer, until the rhizomes get really established and are storing a lot of energy. Then you may get blooms in the shade every year, but it's highly unlikely. So you want to plant these in full sun so you can get blooms year after year, and also so that they can spread. If your irises are really taking off and they're starting to get really thick, you're going to need to dig some up and thin them out, because they can choke each other out and die. Or you can get like dead ring if you're planting them like around in a round circle or around tree trunks. So about every 3 to 4 years is when I tend to thin my irises. In this spot, you can see I'm planting them pretty close together because I want this to get thick sooner. So I may have to thin these in the next 2 or 3 years. So here you can see I'm using last year's rhizome. It's still firm, so there's still energy in there. I'm using it to kind of anchor the plant down into the ground, but I'm still leaving the main rhizome's belly exposed. When you plant these, again, you want to make sure the leaves are straight up. Right now it looks like mine are at an angle because it's really windy, so they're kind of laying over a little bit. But like I said earlier, you want to make sure that that back of the rhizome where the leaves are coming out, you want to make sure that that's kind of at an incline. That'll be the highest point of how your plant is planted. And then you can pack the soil on in the front of the rhizome. If you left last year's rhizome on, you could pack that over the top, as long as you keep that belly exposed. That's so important. I can't stress that enough. If you really want your irises to take off and spread and multiply, you really need to make sure that it can get proper energy. So again, full sun, belly exposed, and you should be good. We're getting rain all day tomorrow, so I'm not going to water these in. I'm just going to let them sit like they are. And even if we weren't getting rain this week, I could just leave these like they are and they would be perfectly fine. I've shown you guys the irises around the pond before. I thought I would just show you them again really quick in this video in case you haven't seen them in previous videos. So it looks like they are planted really close to the water, but they're not. You do not want to plant irises in soil that doesn't have proper drainage, or where there's going to be standing water. These are a few feet away from the pond's edge, and they're also a little more elevated from where the water meets the soil. So the soil here is fairly dry. It doesn't have a lot of standing water, and that's why these are thriving here. My only regret is that this area doesn't get as much sun because there are trees around here. It gets kind of dappled sun, but they still do really well. That's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.